Hello, everyone. This is WCG Patient Radio. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast today. I'm Steve Smith, President of Patient Advocacy at WCG, here with our special guest, Dr. David Fajgenbaum. WCG is a company with a 50-year legacy of ethical review of the treatment of people participating in clinical trials and has many clinical services and technologies focused on speed, efficiency, safety, and reduced patient burden in the development of new medicines for unmet medical needs. You can find our other podcasts by searching for the WIRB, that's W-I-R-B, WIRB Copernicus Group in any of the major podcast players such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play. Today we're speaking with Dr. David Fajgenbaum, who leads the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network and the Castleman Disease Center at the University of Pennsylvania. He is Assistant Professor of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, Translational Medicine and Human Genetics, Associate Director, Patient Impact, Orphan Disease Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's the co-founder and executive director of the Castleman's Disease Collaborative Network. He recently came out with a book about his story called Chasing My Cure, A Doctor's Race to Turn Hope into Action. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
David, Dr. Fajgenbaum, that is, a great read. That book of yours is so fantastic, and I actually think it's definitely a potential movie, no kidding. I think people who read it would agree. It's about you and your amazing family and the medical professionals and others that you collaborated with to find a treatment for a very serious disease. But you tell the story so well. There are places that are gut-wrenchingly emotional as we consider your family and people's ambitions, all the people who have disease, and the disease itself. But there are also parts of the book that are hilarious as you provide anecdotes and insight into yourself and those around you, including some of your vulnerabilities and mistakes, and even the story about the first time your wife laid eyes on you. Just a wonderful, wonderful story, the way it's woven together. And it's very informative for medicine and science as well.
Oh,
so
thank you
the
so
most
much,
amazing
Steve.
part of it, yes, you're welcome. I mean, it's my pleasure. The most amazing part is this is a true story, isn't it?
Yeah, sometimes it's kind of, for me, it feels like a bit of a dream or a nightmare to think about some of the places that I've been with my health and that my family has gone through. But I guess it's starting to feel like a dream these days.
So I'm really glad that you're here to tell us more about that. I just have to also say, so people who don't know you yet understand something that really amazes me is you have a Bachelor of Science degree from Georgetown, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have an MBA from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, and your medical degree, your MD, is from University of Pennsylvania. And those things alone are impressive. They're very time-consuming and all-absorbing for people that do that, get that kind of education. And you, as if that's not time-consuming enough, I find it amazing what else happened in your life as you were completing that education and starting your career in medicine, that all these things happened that I think would have knocked a lot of people right off the rails. And here you are with the running the Castleman's disease at the University of Pennsylvania. So what inspired your journey into medicine?
From a young age, I was always very interested in health and wellness. Diet, exercise was always something that I was very interested in. I played football growing up and dreamed of playing college football one day. And so I always had maybe a lean towards thinking about maybe going into sports medicine or medicine in some way. And then shortly after I got to college at Georgetown, my mom was diagnosed with a very deadly form of brain cancer. And really my whole life was turned upside down. And watching her battle with cancer and her incredible physicians working to help her and thinking about the progress and the importance of research and helping patients like my mom, I personally had a major shift where I went from just being somewhat interested in health and wellness to being laser focused on wanting to become a doctor to treat patients like my mom and to help cancer patients so that they wouldn't go through the challenges my mom went through. She ended up passing away 15 months after her diagnosis, And watching her battle and the courage she battled her cancer has served as such just an incredible inspiration to me as I've battled my own personal challenges. And she just was the most incredible role model and person that I've ever interacted with.
Yeah, you paint a picture of your time with your mother in a way that is, I think we all connect to, and really also then speaks to the loss and your response to it, and I guess the drive you had to do something really makes this story incredible, and the results of what you've done. You were diagnosed with Castleman's disease while in the midst of a very demanding time in your medical education and early career development. What was going on in your life then, and how did Castleman's disease enter your life?
So I finished undergrad. I went to graduate school and then medical school, and I was a third-year med student here at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was training to become an oncologist in memory of my mom, and everything was kind of coming together the way that I had hoped it would. And then, kind of out of nowhere, as a third-year medical student, while I was actually finally in the clinics treating patients, I started experiencing fatigue and weight loss. I had abdominal pain. I noticed lumps in my neck, fluid accumulating around my ankles, just really strange symptoms. And I didn't know what it was, but over the course of just a few days, really just a week, I went from being totally healthy to feeling deathly ill. I actually even told my roommates I thought I was dying, and I'm not a very dramatic person. I'm not a hypochondriac, so it was very unusual for me to say something like that. But by the end of that week, I went from a medical school exam that I took. I went down the hall to the emergency department at UPenn, and the doctors did blood work, and they said, "David, your liver, your kidneys, and your bone marrow are all shutting down. We need to hospitalize you right away." And when they hospitalized me, I really deteriorated rapidly. I had a retinal hemorrhage and went blind in my left eye. I gained 70 pounds of fluid. I was so sick that I was drifting in and out of consciousness, and the doctors told my family to say their goodbyes. And so in November of 2010, at 25 years old, a priest came into my room to administer my last rites to me, all without a diagnosis. Everyone thought I wasn't going to survive. Fortunately, right around that time, a diagnosis was made. The procedure to diagnose Castleman disease was performed, and we finally had a name for that thing that was killing me for weeks. And with a name, began treatment. And so, at the time, very little was known about Castleman disease. It's still quite poorly understood, but what was known was that Castleman disease acts in some ways like a cancer, in some ways like an autoimmune disease. And so, since it's so poorly understood, chemotherapy is really the mainstay of treatment. So I was given chemotherapy, and that saved my life. I was able to survive that episode thanks to chemotherapy, but unfortunately, I would go on to have a number of relapses, and even a relapse just a few weeks later put me back in the hospital with multiple organ failure again. And to kind of imagine what it looks like, a patient like myself. If you've ever seen a patient with stage 4 cancer, or maybe someone who is in septic shock, that's really what this disease looks like and how it manifests. But unfortunately, very little is known about how and why that happens.
And this diagnosis, was it, is diagnosis of Castleman's disease something that's straightforward now? And was it straightforward then, like just a matter of waiting for a test, or was it a complex thing to diagnose?
A great question. It's changed a lot. So back in 2010, when I was diagnosed, there were no diagnostic criteria. So the only way you could diagnose it is if you had a physician who knew of the disease and had read medical articles about the disease. So they knew what to look for. But there was no checklist. There was no criteria for how to diagnose it. And so as I continue to battle this disease, I actually decided to dedicate my life to trying to cure the disease. And one of the first steps I took was bringing together a community of physicians, researchers, and patients to establish the first ever diagnostic criteria. So whereas it took me 11 weeks to get diagnosed, and if it had taken 11 weeks and 2 days, I probably would not have survived, now patients are getting diagnosed with just a few days of showing up at the hospital because there's finally a checklist. And of course, that's not the case for everyone. There certainly are patients where it takes a while to diagnose them because we need to raise more awareness for the disease. But generally, it's a very different diagnostic journey these days.
Well, that's an incredible step right there, that you got that diagnosis time shortened, and you did it through collaboration. Can you say something about the importance of collaboration? I know that you talk about that in your book and how that comes together.
Absolutely. For more common diseases, collaboration is important, but it's not always essential because you might have enough researchers and enough doctors and enough patients at any one institution. But when you're talking about a rare disease, collaboration is essential because no one institution has enough patients or enough researchers or physicians to be able to figure it out on their own. You have to collaborate across institutions, and in our case, across the world, to identify the patients to study. There are about 5,000 patients diagnosed each year with Castleman disease, so it's about as common as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, but obviously has much less awareness that has been raised for it. So it's a rare disease, but it's not that rare, and we still have a lot of work that needs to be done.
So for most rare diseases, there are few or no treatment options. In fact, for most, it's true that there are no treatment options.
That's right.
Only about roughly 500 out of 7,000 classified rare diseases have an FDA-approved treatment of any kind. So most of them don't. So what's it like to learn as the patient that you were that there are no FDA-approved therapies?
Oh, it was frightening. It was scary to not know what disease I had. And, the unknown was scary. And then to find out what I had gave me some relief. But then it was then scary to hear that there were no FDA-approved drugs. Fortunately, around the time that I was diagnosed, there was a drug undergoing a clinical trial, a drug called cetuximab, that I was very hopeful would maybe be the drug that would keep me in remission and it would treat my disease. I got it when I had a major relapse in the midst of a 7-week hospitalization. And unfortunately, it didn't work during my relapse, but I got chemotherapy. A combination of 7 different chemotherapies got my disease into remission. But I was hopeful that maybe even if this drug didn't get me into remission, maybe it could prevent a relapse. And so I remained on this experimental drug. And then about a year later, I relapsed on that drug. And so it was maybe even scarier, even more scary at this stage, to go from there being one experimental drug to all of a sudden realizing that the only drug in development, the only drug where there's any research being done for my disease, did not work. And I had a conversation with my doctor where I asked, what else is coming down the pipeline? What other promising leads are there? And he explained to me that no one knows, and that there were no more drugs coming down the pipeline. And for me, that was a major turning point in my life. When I think about my life thus far, I think the first major turning point was my mom's diagnosis, and that just kind of turned my whole world upside down. Her passing really shook me to my core. The next really critical moment in my life, even more so than the diagnosis with Castleman's and having my last rites read to me, but I think the next most critical moment of my life was learning that there was no more research being done. There was no reason to be hopeful, and there were no options coming down the pipeline. And that's when I realized that I needed to stop hoping and praying that someone somewhere would figure out my disease, and that if I was hoping for it and if I was praying for a treatment and a cure, that I would need to take action, and I would need to turn my hope into action. So I turned to my dad, my sisters, and my girlfriend, Caitlin, and I promised them that I would dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to trying to identify a treatment or a cure for this disease. And trust me, I didn't think that I was going to find anything. I hoped that I would find something that could help maybe someone else, but I certainly didn't think I could find something that would help me in time to save my life. But I wanted to go out swinging. I knew that if I didn't try, there was a 0% chance, and I knew if I did try, maybe there was a 1% chance. but that was better than 0%. And so I decided to dedicate my life to trying to fight back against this disease.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of patients do have hope in the clinical trials they join because they know that maybe the only drug out there where hope is there's a potential for something to work, and then if it doesn't, it can be quite devastating. And I know you mentioned Santa Claus in your book, the concept of hoping Santa Claus will bring you some kind of something to save you.
Yes.
But in fact, you had to really save yourself. And tell us what you did next and something about the scientific discovery or the breakthrough that actually started to work that you found.
Sure. So my book
and
really
is
is
a treatment or a cure.
Sure, absolutely. So my book's really a book about hope. You used the word hope earlier, and I've used the word hope a few times already. Hope can be really powerful when you see someone doing well with your disease and you can believe that you can be there. That can help you to fight in the midst of tough times. But hope can actually also sometimes get in the way of action. Hoping that someone somewhere will figure out your disease, or in my case, what I describe in the book as the Santa Claus theory of civilization, and that's that there's sometimes we have this sense, and I certainly was guilty of it myself, that there must be some team of people out there working diligently to solve problems, and that they, if anything that you could be facing for your health or someone you love, or even outside of health, there most certainly must be groups of people working to solve these problems. And I think Google can sometimes perpetuate this concept, because it seems like any question you put into Google, you can get an answer, or you can learn about someone somewhere working on an answer. And I think the news also perpetuates it, because you hear headlines about breakthroughs. You don't see headlines that say 10 million experiments today did not lead to a single breakthrough, which is actually the norm. Lots and lots of things are happening that are not leading to breakthroughs, and unfortunately for a lot of diseases, no work is being done. And for me, I didn't appreciate that or didn't realize that until I dove into this rare disease world. And so as I dove into it, I learned that for a lot of diseases, like you said, most rare diseases do not have a single drug that is approved, and many don't have any drugs in development. And so you can really feel alone. And for me, I mentioned that I made this promise. Chemotherapy saved my life for the fourth time, thankfully. When I got out of the hospital, I decided to create a foundation called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network to try to accelerate research on a global scale, and also to begin conducting laboratory research here at the University of Pennsylvania. No one was studying Castleman disease here, but a colleague of mine provided me some laboratory space so I could start performing experiments on my own samples. And through this foundation and through the research I was doing at Penn, we were starting to make some real progress. It was iterative, but it was real. And then unfortunately, about a year later, in the midst of us building this organization and conducting research, I relapsed again. This time I was getting weekly chemotherapy to try to prevent a relapse, and I still relapsed. I was completely out of options, and I was just devastated and terrified about if I would be able to make it to my fiance and I's wedding date. Caitlin and I had gotten engaged just a few months before that I nearly died for the fifth time, and we had hoped so badly to be able to make it to May 24th of 2014. And so when I relapsed and I was back in the hospital in critical condition, we were terrified. Would I actually be able to make it? Fortunately, chemotherapy saved my life again after weeks in the hospital. But this time, I knew that if I wanted to make it to our wedding date, I would need to be able to find a treatment that could keep me alive and keep me in remission. And so I dove into the data that I'd been generating in the lab. I pulled out samples I'd been collecting on myself, and I really dug into trying to identify something that could help me. And over the course of several weeks, I was able to identify a signal from within the data that suggested to me that a drug that was developed 25 years ago and had never been used before for Castleman disease might actually be effective in treating my disease. It's called sirolimus. It's developed for kidney transplantation, and without any other options, and not necessarily knowing whether it would actually work or not, we decided to try me on it as the first patient ever with Castleman disease. And thankfully, I was able to make it to our wedding day. We were able to get married on May 24th, 2014. And this drug has kept me in remission ever since. It's been almost 6 years now that I've been in remission. And typically I don't say almost 6 years because I usually say exactly how many years and how many months, because I know that I can't round up. I don't know if I'll relapse tomorrow, and I don't know if I'll make it to 6 years. But I also don't like to round down because, we've worked really, really hard for every part of this remission for myself.
Yes, so that's amazing, and it sounds like it's an example of what we in the rare disease world refer to as repurposing a drug that was developed for a different reason. And there are so many medications out there, some of which are approved for other reasons, but are not available to patients with rare diseases because nobody's tried them, or the additional trial hasn't been done.
That's right.
Or they've been kind of put on the shelf for a while. But fortunately, in your case, you found that one.
That's right. There are about 1,500 drugs that are currently FDA approved, and they're approved for about 2,500 diseases. But as you said earlier, there are about 6,500 diseases, maybe over 7,000 actually, that do not have a single FDA approved drug. And so a lot of the reason that I wanted to write this book, Chasing My Cure, is that I want to raise awareness about the fact that sometimes these drugs that were developed for one thing can be repurposed and can be life-saving for another disease. But unfortunately, we haven't done the testing for a lot of these diseases. And unfortunately, there are not always incentives in place to be able to do these really large and expensive clinical trials to test every possible drug for every possible disease. And so I really hope that Chasing My Cure, which came out a couple months ago and has been able to raise some awareness for Castleman disease, I hope it also is able to raise awareness for this concept of drug repurposing.
Yes, I know from my advocacy with rare disease patients on Capitol Hill, we've had a proposed piece of legislation that isn't passed, but it's the Open Act, and we want them to incent companies to it's orphan products extensions now, basically incenting companies to take those products off the shelf and do the additional trial for the rare indications rather than just leave them there on the shelf.
Absolutely. I think it's so important.
You're also talking about the importance of data analysis, where you looked hard into the data and then you looked at some, the retrospective data where you can look back and say, hey, this other drug existed for this other reason. And there's a lot more that can be done today because of the way data is collected and analyzed. We're starting to see some other breakthroughs too, where companies will look at a bigger, wider data set and look back into the past more. And so there are developments that are emerging which may help us get things done that we didn't used to be able to do.
That's exactly right. I shared my story of how I'm on this drug and it's helping me, but this is just one small part of the larger effort against Castleman disease. We have 17 other studies ongoing that are trying to understand what's going on in Castleman disease. How do we better treat it? How do we save patients' lives? We know that this drug that's helping me can help some other patients. We also know a number of patients have received this drug and it has not helped them. So it reminds us of the importance of generating more data, of utilizing more data, more samples to better understand this disease. So I could not agree with you more that we need to utilize all the past data. We also need to use the samples that we have available to us to generate new data and to keep pushing forward our understanding and treatment for rare diseases.
So what is underway at the research organization you're leading at University of Pennsylvania and the Castleman's community in general? And I'm guessing new Castleman's patients are presenting themselves as, all the time.
Exactly. So right now we are really focused on pushing forward research and treatment for Castleman disease. I mentioned we have a number of studies that are currently underway, and really it's with the goal of understanding why does this happen? Why does the immune system attack the body's vital organs the way that it does in Castleman disease? It's called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease because we don't know what causes it. So we want to understand the cause. We want to understand how to better treat it. We also want to understand Castleman disease is so interesting because it sits at the intersection of cancer and autoimmunity. There's features that are cancer-like and autoimmune-like. And so we, as a research program, are very interested in understanding that intersection and how maybe insights into Castleman disease can have really important insights and maybe even therapeutic implications for cancers and also for autoimmune diseases. So we're really interested in these diseases right at that intersection. Want to continue to push forward the science for them. We also are really interested in trying to share the model that we've taken for how we've advanced research for Castleman disease. We've actually taken a quite different approach to research as opposed to raising money and hoping the right researcher applies for the right project at the right time. We've actually built a large community of physicians, patients, researchers, loved ones, used the community to prioritize what research should be done, and then gone outside of the community to identify the best researchers in the world to do our studies. So it gets us away from a kind of insular reactive model towards this really open and proactive model of identifying the right studies and then the right people to do those studies. So we really are trying to share this model worldwide.
Yeah, that's so important, and not something you find around every corner. That proactivity and has to happen in an environment where just enough steps are not being taken for so many diseases.
That's exactly right.
I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the personal side of your life that you talk about so well in the book that makes this an incredibly awesome read. And there's a Caitlin you've mentioned is your wife, and in the story you also talk about when she first laid eyes on you and how you and she were dating and then eventually engaged and so forth. And in the midst of those things, you were also quite occupied with your studies, but also then eventually your disease. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. It's been such a journey for Caitlin and I. No one deals with disease in isolation. Everyone who has a disease, their loved ones battle that disease along with them. And so Caitlin has just been the most incredible supporter for me in going from, as you said, totally healthy college athlete, medical student, to then, being this terminally ill patient. And then transitioning from terminally ill patient to a scientist, and she's been so supportive throughout. For Caitlin and I, we actually broke up just a few months before I first got ill, and we both had this general sense that, like, if it's meant to be, we'll get back together. And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And we have all the time in the world. We're 25 years old. If it's okay if we're broken up now, we'll get back together in the future if it's meant to work out. And then all of a sudden I became deathly ill, and for both of us, that I think crystallized that we actually don't have all the time in the world, and that because we care so much about one another, we do need to fight for one another, and we do need to make one another a priority now. And as you said, she was with me through all of these ups and downs, in and out of the hospital, having my last rites read to me, having to write out a makeshift will from the ICU, and Caitlin never left my side. And amazingly, throughout all this, writing the book actually gave us the first opportunity to actually revisit a lot of these really hard memories. We stored them away in deep parts of our brain and never really wanted to bring them back up. But writing the book really required us to pull these memories out and to talk about them. And it certainly was not easy to relive what it was like to have her watch me so sick in the hospital and not know if I would make it, and to not know if we would make it to our wedding day. But throughout it all, she has just been so supportive to me, and we've had this, amazing gift just 15 months ago when we had our first daughter, Amelia. Amelia has brought us so much joy. And as I think back about all that I thought about when I was in the hospital, I remember that I grieved that I would never be able to have a family with Caitlin, and that I would never be able to be a parent. That was something that was really on my mind as I thought I was, going to die in the next couple of days. And to now be able to have this just incredible daughter who's so sweet. She's 15 months old now. And to know that the work that I did, and that so many people enabled by supporting Castleman disease research, that their donations enabled me to survive, which enabled me to be able to bring Amelia into the world, is just, or for me and Caitlin to bring Amelia into the world, it just means so much to me.
Yes, I saw a picture recently of you and Caitlin and with the baby, and it's just such an adorable picture because all three of you are so good looking and you look so happy. And in some ways, that's a typical family photo. However, when one knows the background, it's just an incredible photo that moment even came to be. And that there you all three are smiling so big.
Yes,
exactly. Really something.
You're absolutely right.
This is the deep impact of your...
Yeah, one, it's that the three of us are physically there. The fact that I survived, that Caitlin stood by my side, that Amelia is here, that is a miracle in itself. That I have hair, that I'm not bald from chemotherapy is another part. The fact that, I look and feel so well is another miracle. And again, it's all thanks to the hard work that so many people have invested, the donations that people have made towards Castleman's research, the sacrifices that scientists have made towards better understanding the disease, and the work, frankly, that my family and my colleagues here at Penn have put into better understanding and better treating this disease, so that it doesn't just help me, but so that it helps thousands of other patients with this disease. The book's called Chasing My Cure, but I think it should probably be called Chasing Our Cures, because it really has been about chasing cures for so many people, with so many people by our side.
Yes, absolutely. And those personal touches that you put into the story are not only a great read, and they're super romantic and they're inspiring, but this is also informative to other people who may be going through this. And as hard as it was for you and Caitlin to bring those topics back out to create the book, other people benefit from seeing that they're not alone and that life sometimes has this in it. But
yes,
you all those lessons that you learned along the way that you convey to us in the book about the immediacy of taking advantage of things now and not giving up and so forth. It's really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Can we circle back and talk a little bit about your mother and your father? Your father was at your bedside a lot, and he's also a doctor, I believe, in the same hospital. And your mother's influence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. They influenced me so much, just like so many parents influence their children. My mom taught me so much during her life before she ever became ill about how to live a purposeful life and how to be there for those that you love. But it really was in her illness that I think maybe I learned the most from her. And it was the way that she faced illness and the way that she fought against cancer so graciously that really served as a blueprint and a guidepost for me as I have been dealing with my own illness. There's a quick anecdote that I'll share from just after her brain surgery was done to take out this really awful form of cancer. And I had just gone to college, and so I flew back to be there for when the surgery was over. It was about a 4.5-hour surgery, and my dad, sisters, and I went back to see her. And we were so worried about if that would be our mom on the other side of the curtain. If it would still, if she would make it, and two, it would still be her. And I remember they pulled back the curtain, and we were just so scared, about what we would learn. And my mom's head was wrapped in a bandage, and she had a bulb coming out of her skull from where fluid was being drained from the surgery. And we were just so scared. And her head was shaven. She had this wrap on, and she looked at us and she pointed to her head and she said, "Chiquita Banana Lady." And we just burst into laughter. In the midst of, after a 4.5-hour brain surgery with cancer literally growing in her brain, she decided to make a joke to our family, so that way we could laugh, and we could laugh with her. And that served as such an important reminder for me about how when we deal with life's challenges and when we're with the people that we love, that sometimes just little comments like that, things that can make us laugh together, can be so important, and how important humor can be in the midst of really, really challenging times. And that's something that's one of the dozens of things that my mom taught me, And my dad throughout my life has always been such a reminder to me of the importance of hard work and the impact that we can have on people through his career in medicine, and also through his support of our family. And so I think I feel very fortunate that I was able to have both of them as my parents. My dad continues to support me, and my mom continues to inspire me just from the memories that she left before her passing.
I remember you mentioned she helped you develop your football skills, which were considerable, by letting you pass footballs to her. And then at some point you had to stop.
That's right. At some point
you were
I was
throwing the football so hard she couldn't catch it anymore.
That's right. But we figured out this system behind my house where I would throw the football at targets, and then it was a targets on a hill, and then she would roll the ball back down the hill, and then I would throw the football at the next target. And it was a way that we could both be out there together, and that she could help me and show her support.
Well, this is just an amazing that all this has transpired, and I wish you just the absolute best for your research and all the things it can do for other people. And could you tell us, for people who are listening and interested, how somebody could donate to the Castleman's Collaborative Network?
Sure. So anyone who would like to donate can go to cdcn.org to donate towards life-saving research for Castleman disease. You can also help to raise awareness about Castleman disease by checking out Chasing My Cure and maybe gifting it to someone who's been inspiring to you, to teach them about this illness through reading the story, but also to hopefully inspire them. I wrote this book because I learned so much about life and about living from nearly dying 5 times and fighting back. Lessons that I wish I didn't have to go through all that I went through to learn, but lessons that I hope that others, like listeners on this call and maybe friends of listeners, can learn without having to go through all the things that I did. And so I would just be so thankful for any donations towards Castleman's research so we can keep moving forward the science, but also for your helping to spread the word about Chasing My Cure.
Great. So for those of you that want to hear it again, it's the Castleman's Disease Collaborative Network. So you can cdcn.org.
That's right.
And then the book is, we're speaking with Dr. David Fajgenbaum today, and the book is Chasing My Cure. It's available on all the book websites. It's by Penguin Books, isn't it?
That's right. And even your local bookstores. It's available everywhere books are sold.
Yes. So I think anybody who gifts it is going to get a big thank you from those who read it. Thank you very much, David. Dr. Fajgenbaum, best of luck to you, and greetings to Caitlin and your family, and thank you for talking with us today.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for all that you do to engage and to promote patient engagement.
Thank you. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Steve Smith, President of Patient Advocacy, and this is WCG Patient Radio.